And we're going to finish up the 45th chapter of Bleak House, which is called In Trust. Esther and Richard are talking. I cut off in the middle of a paragraph last time, so I'll start at the beginning of it again. No, no, cried Richard exultantly. If every farthing of Ada's little fortune were mine, no part of it should be spent in retaining me in what I am not fit for, can take no interest in, and am weary of. It should be devoted to what promises a better return, and should be used where she has a larger stake. Don't be uneasy for me. I shall now have only one thing on my mind, and Voles and I will work it. I shall not be without means. Free of my commission, I shall be able to compound with some small users, who will hear of nothing but their bond now. Voles says so. I shall have a balance in my favor anyway. But that would swell it. Come, come. You shall carry a letter to Ada from me, Esther, and you must both of you be more helpful to me and not believe that I am quite cast away just yet, my dear. I will not repeat what I said to Richard. I know it was tiresome, and nobody is to suppose for a moment that it was at all wise. It only came from my heart. He heard it patiently and feelingly, but I saw that on the two subjects he had reserved, it was at present hopeless to make any representation to him. I saw, too, the sense of my guardian's remark, that it was even more mischievous to use persuasion with him than to leave him as he was. Therefore I was driven at last to asking Richard if he would mind convincing me that it really was all over there, as he had said, and that it was not his mere impression. He showed me without hesitation a correspondence making it plain that his retirement was arranged. He told me that Mr. Voles had copies of these papers, and had been in consultation with him throughout. Beyond ascertaining this, and having been the bearer of Ada's letter, and being, as I was going to be, Richard's companion back to London, I had done no good by coming down. Admitting this to myself with a reluctant heart, I said I would return to the hotel and wait until he had joined me there. So he saw me to the gate, and Charlie and I went back. There was a concourse of people in one spot, surrounding some naval officers who were landing from a boat, and pressing about them with unusual interest. The gentlemen came slowly up from the waterside, speaking good-humoredly to each other and to the people around, and glancing about them as if they were glad to be in England again. "Charlie, Charlie," said I, "come away," and I hurried on so swiftly that my little maid was surprised. It was not until we had shut up in our cabin room, and I had had time to take breath, that I began to think why I had made such haste. In one of the sunburnt faces I recognized Mr. Allan Woodcourt, who I had been afraid of, and I had been afraid of his recognizing me. I had been unwilling that he should see my altered looks. I had been taken by surprise, and my courage had quite failed me. But I knew this would not do, and now I said to myself, "My dear, there is no reason. There is, and there can be no reason at all why it should be worse for you now than it has ever been. What you were last month, you are today. You are no worse, you are no better. This is not your resolution. Call it up, Esther, call it up." I was in great trouble, and at first was quite unable to calm myself, but I got better, and I was very glad to know it. The party came to the hotel. I heard them speaking on the staircase. I was sure it was the same gentleman, because I knew their voices again. I knew Mr. Woodcourt's. It would still have been a great relief to me to have gone away without making myself known, but I was determined not to do so. I untied my bonnet and put my veil half up, wrote on one of my cards that I happened to be there with Mr. Richard Carstone, and sent it to Mr. Woodcourt. He came immediately. I told him I was rejoiced to be by chance among the first to welcome him home to England, and I saw that he was very sorry for me. "You have been in a shipwreck and peril since you left us, Mr. Woodcourt," said I, "but I can hardly call that a misfortune which enabled you to be so useful and so brave. We read it with the truest interest. It first came to my knowledge through your old patient, poor Miss Flight, when I was recovering from my severe illness." "Ah, little Miss Flight," he said. "She lives the same life yet?" "Just the same." I was so comfortable with myself now as not to mind the veil, and to be able to put it aside. Her gratitude to you, Mr. Woodcourt, is delightful. She is the most affectionate creature that I have reason to say. You have found her so? He returned. I am glad of that. He was so very sorry for me that he could scarcely speak. I assure you, I said, that I was deeply touched by her sympathy and pleasure at the time I have referred to. I was grieved to hear that you had been very ill, but you have quite recovered. I have quite recovered my health and my cheerfulness, said I. You know how good my guardian is, what a happy life we lead, and I have everything to be thankful for and nothing in the world to desire. I felt as if he had greater commiseration for me than I had ever had for myself. It inspired me with new fortitude and new calmness to find that it was I who was under the necessity of reassuring him. I spoke to him of his voyage out and home, and his future plans, and of his probable return to India. He said that was very doubtful. He had gone out a poor ship surgeon, and had come home nothing better. While we were talking, and when I was glad to believe that I had alleviated, if I may use such a term, the shock he had had in seeing me, Richard came in. He had heard downstairs who was with me, and they met with cordial pleasure. I saw that after their first greetings were over, and when they spoke of Richard's career, Mr. Woodcourt had a perception that all was not going well with him. He frequently glanced at his face, as if there were something in it that gave him pain, and more than once he looked toward me, as though he sought to ascertain whether I knew what the truth was. Yet Richard was in one of his sanguine states, and in good spirits, and was thoroughly pleased to see Mr. Woodcourt again, whom he had always liked. Richard proposed that we all should go to London together, but Mr. Woodcourt, having to remain by his ship a little longer, could not join us. He dined with us, however, at an early hour, and became so much more like what he used to be that I was still more at peace to think I had been able to soften his regrets. Yet his mind was not relieved of Richard. When the coach was almost ready, and Richard ran down to look after his luggage, he spoke to me about him. I was not sure that I had a right to lay his whole story open, but I referred in a few words to his estrangement from Mr. Jarndyce, and to his being entangled in the ill-fated Chancery suit. Mr. Woodcourt expressed his regret. I saw you observe him rather closely, said I. Do you think him so changed? He is changed, he returned, shaking his head. It is not his being so much younger or older, or thinner or fatter, or paler or ruddier, as there being upon his face such a singular expression. I never saw so remarkable a look in a young person. One cannot say that it is all anxiety or all weariness, yet it is both, and like ungrown despair. You do not think he is ill, said I. No, he looked robust in body. That he cannot be at peace in mind, we have too much reason to know, I proceeded. Mr. Woodcourt, are you going to London? Tomorrow or the next day. There is nothing Richard wants so much as a friend. He always liked you. Pray help him sometimes with your companionship if you can. You do not know of what service it might be. You cannot think how Ada and Mr. Jarndyce, and even I, how we should all thank you, Mr. Woodcourt. Miss Summerson, he said, more moved than he had been from the first. Before heaven, I will be a true friend to him. I will accept him as a trust, and it shall be a sacred one. God bless you, said I, with my eyes filling fast, and I thought they might, when it was not for myself. Ada loves him, we all love him, but Ada loves him as we cannot. I will tell her what you say. Thank you, and God bless you. In her name. Richard came back as we finished exchanging these hurried words, and gave me his arm to take me to the couch. Woodcourt, he said, unconscious with the application, pray let us meet in London. Meet, said the other. I have scarcely a friend there now. But you? Where shall I find you? Why, I shall get a lodging of some sort, said Richard, pondering. Say at Voles, Simon's Inn. Good, without loss of time. They shook hands heartily. When I was seated in the coach, and Richard was yet standing in the street, Mr. Woodcourt laid his friendly hand on Richard's shoulder and looked at me. I understood him, and waved mine in thanks. And in his last look as we drove away, I saw that he was very sorry for me, and I was glad to see it. I felt for my old self, as the dead may feel if they ever revisit these scenes. I was glad to be tenderly remembered, to be gently pitied, not to be quite forgotten. And that is the end of chapter 45.